Before we jump in, I want to tell you that back by popular demand is Ellen's course, At Ease, Safe Spaces for Home and On the Go. This live course from Karen Pryor Academy got rave reviews last time, and it's all about creating spaces that actually help your pet feel safe at home and out in the world. Head to petharmonytraining.com/safe space to learn more and grab your spot. That's petharmonytraining.com/safe space.
There's so many myths that hold us back from listening to and respecting dogs as individuals. And we know that a lot of ideas, outdated ideas about behavior, kind of get in the way of that. And I think breed essentialism also gets in the way of that. And, the idea that a certain breed or a type of dog has a fixed type of personality or they have a fixed traits. And I hope this book shows that these are ideals we have. They're not real dogs, and that our ideals are changeable. And the way we think about dogs is really dependent on context and dependent on so many things. And I hope it all comes back to seeing and hearing, listening to dogs as individuals.
Welcome to Enrichment for the Real World, the podcast devoted to improving the quality of life of pets and their people through enrichment. We are your hosts, Allie Bender.
And I'm Emily Strong.
And we are here to challenge and expand your view of what enrichment is, what enrichment can be, and what enrichment can do for you and the animals in your lives. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Enrichment for the Real World. And I want to thank you for rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts.
The voice you heard at the beginning of today's episode was Lili Chin. Lili Chin is an author-illustrator best known for her animal-related art and books. Since 2008, she has been providing custom illustration and a catalog of art products for sale and creative, expressive, and educational illustrations for the world of companion animal behavior and welfare, animal lovers, and businesses. Lili is Malaysia-born, spent most of her youth in Sydney, Australia, and currently lives in Los Angeles with her writer husband and two rescued and bonded cats, Mambo and Shimmy. I will never stop being amazed by Lili's ability to dive deeply into complex topics like body language and breeds, and then convey all that information in succinct words and what she calls a new-to-her minimalist illustration style. Being able to self-edit like that are #life goals for me. In this episode, you're going to hear Lili and I talk about why we both prefer the term solo dogs instead of dog-aggressive dogs, me trying to wrap my head around the difference between breeds and land races and only kinda sorta starting to figure it out, and why dog breeds are more about humans than dogs. All right. Okay, tell us your name, pronouns, and pets.
My name is Lili Chin. My pronouns are she, her. I have two pets. They're cats. Mambo is a black fluffy cat with one eye. Shimmy is a tiny gray and white tuxedo cat. And they love each other.
That's so cute. I miss living with kitties, and I love the bond that two cats can really share. It's really sweet. Yeah. So tell us your story and how you got to where you are.
Okay, so I'm an illustrator and an author, although the author part of it is quite new. I've been working as an illustrator since around 2008. I started off as a pet portrait artist when I just adopted my Boston Terrier Boogie, who's no longer with us. At the time, I drew people's dogs and cats. That was my small business. So I had a terrible, devastating, life-changing incident that happened to me shortly after I adopted Boogie. He bit my building manager and I got an eviction notice, which kind of threw me into learning about dog training and dog behavior. And I learned in the process that, not all dog trainers are the same. There are ethical dog trainers and there are dog trainers who still stick with outdated ideas. So I started illustrating a lot of things I was learning in my blog at the time, which no longer exists, and which connected me with a lot of wonderful people like Dr. Sophia Yin, the late Dr. Sophia Yin, and I was her illustrator for 3 years. I also illustrated dog body language charts, infographics for various people in the dog behavior world. And at the same time, I was also running an online store on Etsy, selling my own art and products. And to cut a very long story short, in around 2019, I was approached by a publisher to turn my dog body language poster into a gift book. And that's how Doggy Language started. That was my first published book. And Boogie passed away in 2020, and my husband and I adopted two cats, Mambo and Shimmy, and I started becoming obsessed with my cats and learning about cat behavior, and that led to Kitty Language, my second book. And Dogs of the World is my third book. It was part of a 2-book deal that I had with my publisher, and this was one of the ideas I pitched to them and the one they picked. So today I'm still doing all the things. I'm still doing pet portraits. I still have an online shop. I'm still doing infographics for behavior professionals, and I've got books. So that's where I am today.
And I love everything you do. I love your work. And this is our second time to have you on the podcast because everybody at Pet Harmony, we're a big fan of what you do and how you talk about body language and how you think about the human animal relationship and human animal interaction. So thank you for everything you do. And having said that I love everything you do, your new book is my favorite thing that you've ever done.
Thank you. This means I'm a fan of yours, so this means a lot.
First of all, every page that I was reading, I was just like, yes, like, oh my gosh. And I have to say that a moment that I actually was so happy that I actually got teary-eyed was in the chart, in the infographic where you're talking about the Morel study. Morel, I don't know how to pronounce her last name. And and so her study, for those of you who aren't familiar with it or haven't read Lili's book yet, her study, she and her team were looking at different personality traits and finding which ones were more which ones were more influenced by genetics than others. And one of the kind of personality traits that's listed in your infographic is dog sociability. And you put in there, and it's such a tiny footnote, but it actually brought tears to my eyes. You put in there dog solo or dog selective. And I got so emotional about that because I'm getting emotional now because I get so upset when people talk about dog aggression, dog directed aggression as a personality trait, because that's not true. Dogs aren't intrinsically aggressive towards their own species. They can be intrinsically they can be born not really wanting to have a lot to do with other dogs. But the reason that they are aggressive is because we believe that dogs are dog social and that they should be social with other dogs. And we force dog solo dogs to interact with other dogs. And so we are the reason that these dogs learn to behave aggressively towards every other dog. Now, I am not claiming that it's unnatural for dogs to ever get in conflict with each other. That's obviously not true. But this idea that dog aggression is a personality trait and that there are some dogs that are just born to instantly attack any other dog they see as a normal behavior that's just genetically in there with them, that's not true. Conflict is a natural part of life. Seeking conflict towards every member of your own species that's not evolutionarily adaptive for anybody. When you chose to call them solo dog or selective dog instead of aggressive or selective, I got so teary-eyed. I'm so emotional about that.
So I personally have a pet peeve about the word aggressive. I had a sensitive dog, and so I'm very familiar with the experiences of helping my dog feel safe around other dogs, and I was very aware that he had friends, but not every dog was his friend. And so that's sort of informed by my own life experiences as well. And the interesting thing is, when I first started working on this book, when I first told people I was doing a dog breed book, it was interesting that one of the questions that came up a lot was, oh, so are you going to write about all the different breed personalities? Even my editor asked that question. Because originally I pitched it as a book of pictures. I wasn't really going to do a lot of writing. Well, that changed quickly when I started researching and hearing the kind of questions people asked. And my editor had the same question: will you be writing about different breed personalities? And I realized that I had to tackle that subject. So hence the moral book, the moral study. Yeah.
And you do it so beautifully. love how you talk about breeds and how we should be thinking about breeds, and that you are really careful in how you talk about that, and you're very precise. You're like, you talk about the fact that like personalities are not like there's not a one-to-one relationship between morphology and personality, that you can't assume a dog's personality based on how they look. And that is really important to me, because so often we see people that are saying, well, this dog needs this thing because they look this way, or this dog is going to want this thing because they look this way, or this dog has limitations on what their capabilities are because they look this way. And obviously, like, that can be really harmful. So I love how careful you are in talking about, like, one of the other things that you said that had me like cheering out loud was the personality traits that are listed for breeds are the ideal that these breed standards expect of these dogs, that expect of like the ideal specimen. But that doesn't mean that every dog of this breed is going to have these personality traits or these behaviors. And you also talk about how personality traits, that's a very fluid, subjective thing. And that like what one person means by aloof is not necessarily what another person means. And you do have this beautiful infographic about like how like depending on what their expectation of the dog is influences how we interpret their behavior. There's that infographic with the beagle where you're like, in a working situation, this dog pulling on the leash, they're like, this dog's a rock star doing his job. And in a pet situation, they're like, this dog is stubborn, right? It's the same behavior, but the context is different. I'm just telling you your book back at you. But I mean, like, there's so much of that. And what blows my mind is that you are able to get so much of that information across so succinctly. And you even do that with your illustrations too, where you even say in your book that you were trying to do sort of like minimalist illustrations, but they're so powerful because you look at them and you know exactly what breed you're looking at. So, okay, I'm going to stop fangirling at you. So you already kind of told us what inspired you to write this book, which was one of the things I was going to ask you. But also, so what were some of your biggest aha moments and the takeaways that you learned in the process of doing the research for this book? What I just told you some of my favorite things about the book. What are some of your favorite things about your book?
So I think the biggest aha moment for me was when I started researching was I need another year on this book. There was just so much there. Because I originally pitched the book as a book of designs. I wasn't planning to do a ton of writing, but my editor wanted words. I had to write something. And when I started reading about dog breeds, it occurred to me that there were so many categories and labels that needed defining. Like, as you know, like purebred dogs are classed into groups. There are herding dogs and livestock guardian dogs and scent hounds and sight hounds and all these labels we use. And I thought, I need to explain what all these mean. I need to find out myself what all these things mean. So, there was that chapter on different dog types and roles. And the other thing that was amazing to me was that most of the dogs in the world aren't breeds. Like most of the dogs in the world are no breed dogs. I mean, we call them village dogs. That's kind of, I guess, the label we use, consensusly accepted word. But most, I spoke to Dr. Catherine Lord, and she said, well, they're actually no breed dogs. They just don't have a breed. And I wanted to include those dogs, in this book, because you don't often see them included in dog breed books. Dog pedigree dogs or purebred dogs usually take the full stage. And I wanted to look at the history of purebred dogs within a bigger context, like zooming out and seeing where they fit within a bigger world of dogs and how they came about. And it's fascinating that, most of the modern breeds we know today were invented by people only 200, 250 years ago. They're modern human creations. I mean, I think that's amazing. I mean, it's kind of a bit scary, but it's also amazing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I love that. I love how much you talk about the landrace and village dogs and the no breed dogs. And I love how you clearly define. I mean, we can talk about that later. I'm getting off on my own little bunny trail, but to me, like your discussion of breeds in the context of the wider world of dogs is so inclusive. And I think it's really important, especially for Americans and Westerners, like perhaps Europeans too, to a lesser extent, to read about dog breeds in that context, because we tend to have a very geocentric belief about animal welfare, that we are the pinnacle, that we do it best, and everybody else has to get up to speed with how we think about and handle dogs. And actually, if you look at the rest of the world, there are a lot of places on this planet that do some things much better than we do. And we could learn a lot from them if we had the intellectual humility to remove that assumption that we're the best at animal care and actually be willing to learn from other cultures. And that's not to say that like everywhere does. I just did an interview for somebody that the episode will come out actually in our next season for reasons. And she's based in Vietnam, and there's not a lot that we learned in that I learned in that conversation from her, that there's not a lot that in Vietnam has shining welfare examples for animals, but their willingness to learn and their openness and their growth mindset, they run circles around us in that regard, right? So I love that you really talk about that, because I think it's important for those of us who live in the United States to really be aware of what the rest of the world is doing, right?
Definitely, especially now. Yeah.
It is more important than ever that we learn how to take several seats and sit down and shut up and learn from the rest of the world. Yeah. So one thing that you taught me that I actually want to bring up is that I would like in the vein that the kind of path that I started to go down is that I had learned that pariah dogs were the name for what I learned from you are primitive type breeds. I had heard them called pariah dogs, and I'm familiar with the way pariah has been used in a derogatory way towards humans, but I just assumed that it was a homonym. Like, it didn't even occur to me that the pariah, as we refer to dogs, was related to that history with humans. So because I learned that from you, can you speak more to that? Because I think that's a really important distinction to make.
It's still used. The term pups is still sort of an official label for dogs that are free ranging, that are in Asia and Africa, that are not purebred dogs. But pariah is also, and I'm from Malaysia, a Southeast Asian country where we pronounce it as pariah. And that is like a negative, offensive label for people. So that's my personal connection with it. And I personally did not feel comfortable using that word in relation to dogs because it does cast them as a lower class of dogs. And the purpose of my book was to kind of not get into classes, not to rank dogs in any way. So that was my personal reason for not using the word. I mean, but at the same time, I'd also had a conversation with a dog scholar in India, and Rajashri Kalap. She has co-written this great paper, this presentation that goes into terminology we use for different types of dogs that are not purebred dogs. And the problem with the word pariah is that it tends to conflate different things and causes confusion. People use the word pariah to refer to stray dogs, or to refer to street dogs who are just roaming, who are not owned. People also use the word pariah to refer to primitive type dogs that look like Basenjis or village dogs, the Afrikaners, dogs that have big pointy ears and curly tails and skinny bodies. Those dogs are also referred to as pariah. So it's conflating a phenotype, physical traits, with mode of life. And I think that's why that term causes confusion, because there are dogs that are community dogs, and they are free ranging. They're not owned by any particular private property. They live within communities, and they may or may not be primitive type dogs. And there are primitive type dogs that may or may not be free ranging. They may be dogs who live in homes. For that reason, I didn't use that word, because I just think it causes confusion, and it has an offensive tone from where I'm from. I guess and this is going off track slightly, but it's also the reason why I didn't use the word bitch in my book. Bitch is a legitimate word for a female dog in UK and in certain parts of the world, but I personally don't feel comfortable calling dogs bitches, and it has a misogynistic tone to it.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a linguistic term called semantic drift, and that's when a word originally meant one thing, and then over time it came to mean another thing. And a lot of times, semantic drift happens where either the original use of the word was an incredibly oppressive, marginalizing, cruel definition, and then has come to mean something totally benign, or vice versa, where it used to mean something benign or even good, and then over time the semantic drift happened, and then it became oppressive language or othering language, marginalizing language. And there's a lot of controversy over whether the like one whether semantic drift nullifies the oppressiveness of a word, right? Like, well, I don't mean it in its current use, I mean it in its original use, or vice versa. Like, we should, even though it means that now, we shouldn't use it because back then it meant. And I don't feel like I have the right to have strong opinions about that. I just listen to those conversations, but I do think it's really good that in your book, like that whether or not we can call a dog a bitch, whether or not women can call each other a bitch in kind of a reclaiming way, those are certainly conversations worth having. But in a book where you don't have the opportunity to have that conversation with your readers, I love that you chose caution and kindness as your baseline and then moved forward from there. I think that's a beautiful way to handle the sort of semantic drift controversy that happens, right?
Yeah, I mean that was important to me, and yeah, and the same with certain dog breed names. I do bring that up as well.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are horse breed names too that I'm like, I just called the horse Vanner. I'm not going to use the whole name because the whole name is problematic as hell, right? So yeah, for sure. I love that you take that consideration for other people and populations and cultures in your word choice in the book. So because another thing that I loved about the book, and I learned a lot from you in terms of the very clear distinctions. Can you talk more about the difference between landrace, feral, community, primitive type? Can you sort of give people a sneak peek into the book?
Yeah, so landrace. So this was challenging because I had to talk to a whole bunch of people because everyone had a slightly different definition of what a landrace is. But ultimately, I went with there's a book by Philip Sponenberg. I think that's his name. He's written a book. It's actually called Managing Breeds for a Secure Future. It's actually a very dry academic book on livestock breeding, but there were like concept definitions in there that really helped me. And he defines landrace as a pre-breed dog. It's kind of like a breed class, but they are less standardized. They're still the phenotype of dogs who are land races are shaped by their environment, by geography, by culture, by the work they do, they're like regional, rural types of dogs. So if you can imagine a sort of continuum going from no breed dogs to purebred dogs, on on the end of that continuum, we have standardized breeds. These are breeds with standards. It's all written down on paper what they should look like, how much they should weigh, how long their legs are, what colors they are, what type of coat. Those are our standardized breeds. And then on the other end of and they're predictable because people made them to be predictable. We know the genetics, we decide how we want to see them and how we talk about them. They're the dogs that are written in books, usually. On the other end of the continuum, you've got no breed dogs. They're like the village dogs. They breed freely. Their genetics are not under human control. And somewhere in between the two, closer to the purebred end, are the land races. They're dogs who have a somewhat consistent look and somewhat consistent temperament, but they're shaped by geography and they're shaped by culture. They're still shaped by people, but they're not standardized. So there's more flexibility in how they look. So they're the land races. That's how I see it. And then you've got village dogs, as I said before, they're no breed dogs. Their traits are shaped by survival within a certain region. Feral dogs are not actually a type of dog. Feral dogs, and I take a lot of these definitions from Sindur Pangal, who's written a book called Dog Nose, and she's done a lot of speeches or presentations about street dogs. Feral dogs are just dogs that are really scared of people. We call them wild dogs only because they're not socialized to living within human communities, and they may live on the outskirts of human communities. They're not like a distinct type of dog, that any dog can turn feral or be born in a feral condition. Community dogs are free-ranging dogs who live amongst people. They're not feral dogs. Their mode of life is living outside. They don't live. They tend not to live inside homes, and they're not owned by any one particular person. And street dogs fall into that category.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you did. It was really beautiful. It was a really beautiful, eye-opening way of delineating these different types of dogs, because to me, like, I was thinking of feral more in the sort of like original definition of feral, which is like a feral animal is either a domesticated animal that has gotten out and is no longer under human control, or a species that has been displaced by humans from where they are endemic to a new place and they've sort of settled in. But even with under that definition, there's still a lot of fluidity, because, for instance, the horses who live free roaming in the United States were feral. They were brought here by colonizers in the 15th and 16th centuries, but because they have lived here successfully and live in harmony with the ecosystem, and they've been doing that for 500 years, now they're technically classified as wild. So it's like, okay, well, what year did it switch over from feral to wild, right? So like there's so much fluidity in these definitions, and it was really beautiful to hear the specificity with which we use feral to refer to a very specific type of dog who is avoidant of humans, right?
And yeah, I mean, all these categories are fluid. I mean, where you draw the line between these categories will change, depending on where you are, the context. Similarly, like whether a dog is a breed or not a breed depends on who you speak to. Like, for example, like a kennel club, I mean, outside the kennel club system, there are breeds, but they wouldn't be considered breeds within the kennel club system, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I want to do like a real world application thing to see if I'm understanding the definitions correctly. So I started to say a few months ago. I don't remember when. A couple seasons back, I interviewed a friend of mine named Kaylin Hall, and they live in Alaska, and they work with with sled dogs, with huskies. And they said something that I had kind of noticed but hadn't really clearly articulated for myself until they said it in their interview, that what we think of as huskies in the lower 48 are like not actually the working huskies that are up in Alaska. And so like the really pretty, like what you think of as like the floofy sort of wedge ear and the big blue eyes and the big bushy curly tail, that you think of as huskies are like show line huskies that couldn't physically actually do the job that huskies in Alaska do. And that huskies in Alaska don't really have a body type or like a specific morphology. They're the dogs who can do the jobs, right? And so they look different. And I'd sort of like noticed that in like watching TV shows about dogs like who run the Iditarod or whatever. I was like, those don't look like the floofy house dog huskies. But when they articulated that in their interview, that was like, that kind of made a big impression on me. Like, oh yeah, I did see that, but I didn't articulate that for myself. So would I be correct in understanding that the actual working huskies in Alaska are landrace dogs, and the huskies in the United States or in the lower 48 that are so popular is a breed? Is that a good example?
I think breed is a very fluid concept as well. Like, it's kind of a cultural construct. So I would say that the kind of husky use, the showline husky, they're standardized they have they're bred to different standards than the huskies up north. The sled dogs are bred to a working standard, a performance standard, and the ones for shows are bred to show standards. And that's why they look different, and they're different physically and athletically, they have different traits.
So they would still be considered a breed. They're just a working line versus a show line.
Yeah, I would say so. But then whether they're considered a breed will depend on who you talk to. Some, there are people who are snooty who say, oh no, that's not a breed, that's a mixed breed or whatever. I mean, there are people who would have that perspective.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, but then there are also people who would see, but as you say, they could also be seen as land races because they're so. This is years and years ago. I read a book by Edith and Johann Gallant called SOS, and it was about these. It's written by these two purebred dog breeders who kind of moved out of the kennel club system and started promoting, writing about Afrikaners, which is a landrace type of dog from South Africa. And I've just lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So Edith, I mean, I had some email exchanges with her, and they were very adamant about not confusing land races and breeds. Like they wanted the boundary to be quite firm. A purebred dog is the type of dog that is bred for the shows, for conformation, and land races do not have standards. We don't breed to the same standards. These dogs are usually free breeding. They choose their own partners. So that was kind of a distinction that was made to me.
Okay, that's actually really helpful. So the Huskies, by their definition, by Edith's definition, the Huskies in Alaska aren't considered land races because the humans do selectively breed them, or it's in some way, to some measure, control their breeding or direct their breeding. Whereas a land race, really, there is no human interference in their breeding. Is that a good distinction?
I think that it's something that's on a spectrum. I don't think it's that hard and fast. There are dogs that are bred for working, like the Mongolian Bankar in Mongolia. That's considered a land race, but there is some human shaping happening there. But they are bred to be adaptable to their environment versus for show. I think that might be a better comparison.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that it's really complicated and fluid, and like you said, it's again, a conversation worth having, and also being aware that it's that complicated and that there is that much of a spectrum helps to sort of remove that hierarchical or caste mindset that we have about dogs and like which ones are intrinsically better than others. It's like that's not really how it works. They all just kind of do their things and they have a right to exist, and they're each amazing in their own way and all of that. Yeah, I love that. Okay, thank you for that. I don't remember if you cover this in your book, so I'm going to ask you because I have a Basenji puppy, Miley.
I've seen the pictures. Yeah.
I've loved Basenjis for a very long time, most of my life, and I'm very fascinated by them because they are a breed. And there is a breed standard, and most breed clubs around the world recognize them as a breed. And yet, if you look at Basenjis in Africa, they kind of feel more land racy there. So where's the line? There's not a line, right? It's a spectrum. It's a fuzzy gradient. But so what I consider like Miley, who's been very carefully bred, they know her lineage back generation. I would call her type of Basenji a breed, but when I see these Basenjis in Africa who have enormous amount of freedom, they're not quite community dogs because there are people who have very tight relationship with these dogs, but they do have a lot more freedom than our Basenjis, and it seems like they kind of might have a little more choice in who they breed with than maybe they're not as controlled. Is it possible for, we're looking at a dog like a Basenji to in some places be a land race and some places be a breed? Is that a thing?
Well, a land race is just a different class of breed. I think going by it's a different type of breed. It's rather than a fully standardized type, small closed gene pool type of breed, and then you've got a big open gene pool type of breed. So it's just
okay. I'm still, as you can tell, I am still trying to wrap my head around this, but I think that it's a good thing to kind of delve into this and realize it's really tricky.
It's really tricky. So I had a lot of conversations like these as I was writing the book because I was trying to wrap my head around all these definitions. And there's many different ways different angles you can approach it. But so there is that page in my book on purebred dogs where I've created a chart, land races, village dogs, crossbred dogs, and then it goes through the steps into recognition as a pure breed, right?
Yes. Yeah. What page is that on again? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get the book right now and I can look it up.
If somebody asked me what page something in my book was on, I would have no idea. I wouldn't have the foggiest clue. So I know that was a bit of an unfair question to ask.
Pages 20 and 21.
Okay, pages 20 and 21 is where that is. Yeah, that is a really helpful infographic, and also learned it, having read it, in the original manuscript and then in the book, clearly is not enough for me to like fully wrap my head around it and grasp it. But it's okay. I enjoy this state of learning.
I think what I wanted to do was with this book was just to put information out there and to as conversation topics, as conversation starters, as things to think about. I don't have definitive answers. I don't so much of this terminology is sort of in flux, like, it depends on the situation, depends on who you're talking to and what different people's agendas are and so on. So I'm just putting this information out there, and I hope that it will spark conversations and questions and curiosity and debate. And this is cool. Like,
yeah, I mean, it is so important because you even talk about in the book about how, like, even when we're talking about like breed standards and breed types, lineage really impacts that. And that is so true. Like the Basenjis that I knew in Austin, one of the things that I loved about them is that they were kind of aloof towards strangers, and they didn't really care about them. Now, oftentimes because of the way that humans reacted to that, they would end up behaving aggressively towards strangers. But I could see that they mostly just wanted to not care about strangers. And I think that's so beautiful. And I love that. And I admire, I enjoyed that trait about Basenjis. I like the dogs that don't really care about me until I build a relationship with them. And so when I found my breeder up here, she's amazing. I love her so much. She does extraordinary work. And her dogs are really pro-social towards humans. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. For the overwhelming majority of people who get a Basenji puppy, it is going to be advantageous for that dog to be pro-social towards other humans. But if I were to say Basenjis are aloof towards humans, that would be patently false about Miley and her lineage and her family, where she comes from. So it's not necessarily that Basenjis are aloof. It's that the lineages that I knew in Austin were aloof, and the Basenjis from Miley's lineage are very pro-social. And when she meets another human, I am chopped liver. Like, she's like, oh my God, it's a new friend. I need to make the new friend. Mom, I don't care about you right now. I'm going to go meet my new friend. And we're having to work on learning when people want to be her new friend and when people don't want to be her new friend. And we're learning how to ignore the people who don't want to be her friend, and it's very hard for her. And that's a lovely problem to have. And also, that is not what I knew of Basenjis in Austin.
that's so interesting. That is so interesting because that's what I've heard as well. That like Basenjis and primitive type dogs, they're supposed to be aloof and be more like cats.
Well, Miley's very much like a cat in that she likes to drape herself over my shoulders. So she's very kitty-like in that way. She likes to walk along the like narrow edges of things. Like she likes to balance on the back of the sofa. She likes to jump up to high places. It's not going to be very long before she can jump from the floor to my desk. So she has cat-like tendencies. She's a very fastidious groomer. So she's very cat-like in some ways, but not in that aloof towards strangers way. But you know what? I know lots of cats who are very pro-social towards strange humans too. So even that stereotype about cats isn't always true. Even cats have outliers. Yeah. Okay, so aside from we've talked about some of the biggest aha moments that you got in researching this book. Are there specific either breeds that you didn't know about that delighted you, or like certain information about breeds that you didn't know that were just delightful discoveries to you?
So I think let me think. So the things about breeds that I found really fascinating is how Well, usually in dog breed books, each breed is given a sort of like general temperament and, you know, like the idea that breeds have personalities. I find it interesting that a lot of the information, the narratives that go with breeds, they change. They can change over time. Like, for example, or whether a dog is a breed or not, that changes also depending on culture and country. For example, like Belgian Shepherds in I don't know if you know about Belgian Shepherds. So in Belgium, they are all the same breed. There's three or four different varieties of Belgian Shepherds. But in the USA, they are different. They're considered different breeds. And then there are certain dogs where their countries of origin change over time. Like, for example, the Istrian short-haired hound and the Istrian long-haired hound. They were Yugoslavian dogs, but then when Yugoslavia split up into different countries, there was some sort of debate over who was going to get these dogs. And apparently it took several years before the FCI assigned Croatia as their country of origin. And then there's like the Finnish Spitz, which when Finland was annexed by Russia, like they took that breed and gave it a different name. I can't tell you off the top of my head what their name was. And so that it got split into two lineages. And then eventually in the 50s or 60s, they became one lineage again. And they were bred to the Finnish standards, and there was a name change again. So, I mean, a lot of these things, these details are changeable. I mean, dog breeds co-evolve with people and what happens in human cultures. And I think that's really interesting. That's super nerdy, but
No, it's fascinating because the dogs are the same, right? And these like big debates are happening about our constructs around these dogs and the stories that we tell ourselves about them. And the dogs in the meantime are just living their lives and they have no idea.
yeah, they don't care about any of this. Yeah.
That humans are delightful. We do some really interesting things. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, this has been delightful. As you know, at the end of every interview, I love to ask the same set of questions. And my first question is, what are our observable goals and actionable items that people can take away from this discussion?
Well, what I hope this discussion sort of offers is the idea that breed cannot predict as much as we give it credit for. The idea of breeds reflect a lot more about us than about dogs. They tell us more about humans and what dogs mean to us symbolically and also in our lives. I hope that comes across.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And I'm same. I also hope that's the takeaway of today's episode. What is one thing that you wish people knew either about this topic, your profession, or enrichment? Your choice.
I'm sort of combine some of these things about this topic in my profession. So most dog breed books are written by dog fanciers, dog historians, dog breeders, people who are very invested in the breeding of dogs. I'm coming to this subject from a different angle. I'm coming to this as an artist, as someone who's drawn thousands of pet dogs and who's had a pet dog, and I'm just curious about where does my pet dog fit within the broader scheme of things. So I'm offering a more personal perspective. And I just want people to know that it's different because I'm an artist and not a scientist or a historian.
Yeah, it reminds me of Robert Sapolsky's book Behave. And I talk about this all the time. Apologies if you've heard me say this before. Because in his introduction to that book, which is an amazing book and also a flawed book, but one of my favorite things about the book is in the introduction, he uses this analogy of buckets. And in the context of his book, he's talking about academia, where like a particular field gets really deep in their bucket. And the deeper you are in the bucket, the more depth of knowledge you have in that field, but also the less perspective you have on other fields, right? Because you're just so deep in your bucket. And so I think it's a beautiful analogy because I feel like practitioners, we don't have depth in any of the buckets, but we have perspective of all the buckets that a lot of the people who are deep in the buckets lack because they're deep in the bucket. And so we do better when we work together. When academics and practitioners collaborate, we do better because they have a deeper perspective and we have a broader perspective. And what I'm hearing is that this analogy also applies because when a dog fancier or a dog breeder is talking about their breed, they're deep in the bucket, but they lose perspective because they're so deep in their bucket. And you are coming at it. You're not a breeder. You're not, you don't have a lot of investment in any particular breed. You have a really broad perspective, and you spent a lot of time getting deeper into all of the buckets than I think most of us on the outside of the buckets do. But nevertheless, I think you have a broader perspective than a lot of people who are writing about their particular breed that is their passion. And I think that's beautiful. And I think it's really valuable. And like I said, it's my favorite thing you've done so far. I love this book so much.
Thank you. That Robert Sapolsky book is on my to read list. I haven't read it, but I love that analogy of being outside the buckets and seeing. And it did feel that way. And as I was researching, I kind of felt like, should I go deeper into this bucket or that bucket? And thankfully, I had a deadline, and I didn't have a lot of too lost within a single bucket. And yeah, but I really love that analogy, and I say a zoomed out perspective. Yeah, that's what I was going for.
Yes, yeah. I will say 10 out of 10 recommend Behave. And also, just as a warning, the beautiful irony of Robert Sapolsky understanding the coming up with the bucket analogy and understanding that academics get deep in their buckets and lose perspective on other buckets is that 2 chapters after he writes that analogy, he just gets behaviorism so wrong. He's so deeply wrong about behaviorism.
I think a lot of people are.
Right. But it cracks me up because it's like, dude, you know that the buckets, which in critical thinking, that's called the halo effect. When you overestimate, when you have a lot of knowledge in one area, you overestimate your knowledge in other areas. Like the glow of your halo gets cast on fields. And we get to see this beautiful example of the halo effect 2 chapters after talks about it in the bucket analogy. So that's just my warning to you. Just beware. He's very wrong about behaviorism, but it's still an incredible book regardless. So
All right. All right. Okay. I'm now even more interested to read this book just to see what he gets wrong about behaviorism.
it's delightfully imperfectly human of him, and I love him more for it. All right, what is one thing you'd love to see improved in your field, or the field of animal behavior, or breeding, whatever fields you choose?
Yeah. I think this sort of is a very general thing. I think there are a lot of myths, as you know, as a dog behavior consultant. There's so many myths that hold us back from listening to and respecting dogs as individuals. And we know that a lot of ideas, outdated ideas about behavior, kind of get in the way of that. And I think breed essentialism also gets in the way of that. And, the idea that a certain breed or a type of dog has a fixed type of personality or they have a fixed traits. And I hope this book shows that these are ideals we have. They're not real dogs, and that our ideals are changeable. And the way we think about dogs is really dependent on context and dependent on so many things. And I hope it all comes back to seeing and hearing, listening to dogs as individuals.
Yes, I love that. Look at the animal in front of you, listen to the animal in front of you instead of making assumptions about them based on what breed they are, what they look like, what their morphology is. What do you love about what you do?
I get to look at lots of pictures of animals. I get to draw animals for a living. I get to draw what I want to draw, and people pay me. I mean, I love that. And I love that I know a lot of great people. Like, I know a lot of passionate, nerdy people. That's meant as a compliment.
Yes, I also use nerdy as a compliment. It means that you're really passionate about something and you've spent a lot of time learning a lot about it. And I love that. I think it's a compliment. Yeah. Yes, I love that. I love that about what I do too. We have that in common. What are you currently working on? If people want to work more with or learn from you, where can they find you?
Okay, I'm currently working on more infographics for different clients who are animal behavior professionals. I'm also creating art for my online shop, and I am collaborating with a snake expert on snake body language illustrations, which because it's the year of the snake 2025. And people can find me at doggydrawings.net, which is DOGGIE DRAWINGS.net. That's my website. And yeah, and my socials are all on there as well.
Awesome. I'm going to put you in touch. We had somebody from Pet Pro named Thea Harding on the podcast a couple seasons ago, and she's a bunny. Yes, she's a bunny person. And on her episode, we talked about how we want you to do bunny stuff. So I'm going to put the two of you in touch and see if you'll collaborate with her on bunny stuff.
I'd love to. I have actually done something bunny related. I do on my website under infographics there is a bunny body language chart. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay, well, thank you for letting me know. I'll let Thea know too, because that's what we want. We want bunny body language stuff. So awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Lili, again so much. It's been lovely to have you back on the podcast. I enjoy speaking with you so much, and I appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if there's someone in your life who also needs to hear this, be sure to text it to them right now. If you're a pet parent looking for more tips on enrichment, behavior modification, and finding harmony with your pet, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Pet Harmony Training. If you're a behavior training professional dedicated to enrichment for yourself, your clients, and their pets, check us out on TikTok and Instagram at Pet Harmony Pro. As always, links to everything we discussed in this episode are in the show notes. Thank you to Ellen Yoakum for editing this episode and making us sound good. Our intro music is from Penguin Music on Pixabay. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps more pet lovers and professionals find us so they can bring enrichment into their world too. Thank you for listening, and here's to harmony.